Morning, my name's Ray. I'm with Team S.T.E.A.M. This morning I'm stepping out of Flash Industrial for a little bit. I got the boys in there working on a vac truck that we're doing, while Jen and I spent some time in the garden today getting some of this spring's fruit tree and berry bush pruning done. And since we're out here, we'll check in with the greenhouse here for just a minute. Look at all this growth and productivity. Over the last few days, Jen and Ash have gone through and taken small popsicle sticks and labeled all these plants individually. The reason they use popsicle sticks, we used to use the tags, but you know, they'll break down in the garden eventually, and then you got plastic in your soil. So, and the writing doesn't stay on them forever. So if you're gonna have something that the writing doesn't stay on forever and it breaks down in the soil, it might as well be wood. So they've gone through and they've labeled everything. And as you can see, these plants are coming up nicely. It won't be but just a few more weeks and we'll have them in the soil outside. Look at all those guys. The greenhouse is just about, look at all that lettuce. The greenhouse is just about completely full. Now what do you say we get back out to the garden? You see, it's mid-April, and so it's that time of year where if we're gonna get any of this pruning done on any of these fruit trees or berry bushes, now's definitely the time while they're still dormant. Right behind me, I've got a peach tree. Over here, I got a cherry tree. I've got numerous other peach trees, plum trees, apple trees. We have to take a look at them and see what needs to be pruned while they're still dormant. And we also have some berry bushes we're going to be looking at this morning as well. One of the keys to solid production and disease and fungal free plants is making sure that they are pruned correctly for airflow and for sunlight. And today that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be looking at quite a few of these trees and we're going to prune them to get the very best production and prune them for the health of the tree themselves. And we're also going to be digging into some of these black raspberry bushes and getting them pruned out as well. Now, for a lot of fruit tree growers, there's a couple different ways of going about it. This peach tree behind me, as you can see, has multiple legs off of the base of it. See, there's no single large trunk coming up. That's what's called a central leader. There's no central leader. There can be, but there's a lot of ways of doing it. And we choose, with our peach trees and plum trees at least, to not have a central leader. We like these legs to come off. We like there to be, 4 or 5 of them, 5 good strong legs coming off, and no central leader. And that's kind of known as the wine glass shape. And the reason for that is because you want as much sun and air to be able to get through there as possible. The more sun can get in here and invigorate those leaves, the better off you are. And with no central leader, that's a good way of growing peaches and plums. That's the way we prefer. And again, here with this plum tree, there's no central leader. We've got that basic wine glass shape. That's going to allow as much sunlight as possible and as much ventilation to get through there as possible, which is going to keep your fungal issues more minimized. Whereas this apple tree, we've got a central leader going all the way up. Now this is pre-pruning. We haven't pruned anything yet, but this is the difference between our apple trees and our peach and plum trees. Now, when you're pruning your plum trees or your peach trees or even your apple trees, first thing you want to do is just step back and just sit and look at it. And what's important to keep in mind when you do isn't necessarily the branches you want to get rid of, it's the branches you want to keep. And if you can visualize your tree with all the branches you wish to keep, that's going to be a pretty good start. But to actually start, you want to put your cutters on the tree somewhere. You want to pick diseased and dead branches first. Anything that's diseased, dead, broken, damaged, anything like that, that's the first things you want to cut off. Now on a peach tree such as this one, we don't have the framework shape exactly where we want it. We're going to need to work on that, but what's important to remember is that the fruiting spurs are on 1-year-old wood on a peach tree, whereas a plum tree like this one, you're going to find some fruiting spurs on the 1-year-old wood, but the bulk of them, the majority of the time, are going to be on 2-year-old wood. So it's important that you know that before you go pruning off everything that's going to produce fruit. Pear trees, such as this Asian pear, same thing. It's going to, the fruiting spurs are going to be predominantly on 2-year-old wood on a pear tree. Same with an apple tree, like this guy here, and you can see this one is just covered in fruiting spurs. This is a 5-6-year-old tree, but nonetheless, on the wood that it grows this year won't bear fruit next year. And like this plum tree here, you can see this 1-year-old wood, no very productive fruiting spurs, and on the 2-year-old wood, that's where they all are. So where to begin is, like I mentioned, you want to get your diseased, dead, damaged branches out of the way. Once that's done, you want to start looking at the branches that are aiming towards the center. This is a tree without a central leader. This rule applies to trees without a central leader. So any of these branches, like this guy right here, that are going right up the center, all of these guys right here, they're going right up the center. All they're going to do is make foliage that's going to block the sun and hinder proper airflow. So, you know, anything that's pointed towards the center of that, you know, you want to get rid of those first. And like this peach here, the next thing you want to look at after you've gotten your center ones out, and we haven't done any pruning yet, I'm just talking, is you want to run your hand underneath the branch, and if it snags on anything, that's a branch that's coming off of your branch that's pointing downward. That's not likely to be productive. It's not likely to get enough sunlight. Those are another one that need to go. Like this guy right here, that'll be a good one to go. Any of them that are underneath the branch would be a good one to go. So this plum tree, you can see this one's going to want to go because it comes up toward the center. This guy up toward the center. This one is up toward the center. If they cross each other like these two, you need to pick which one has got to go. This one's dead, so it'll of course go, but this one will go anyway because it's going up toward the center. Same with the underside rule. This one's coming out the bottom side, it'll go. Same with this apple tree here. You've got this branch here coming out the bottom, it'll go. You've got this one coming out the bottom, it'll go. You got this one pointed up toward the center. Of course, we have a central leader, so it's important to distinguish the difference. But any of them that are going to crowd that central leader need to go. Like this little guy right here, that's not crowding anything, but you need to maintain some sort of chimney shape. In other words, about 6 inches on either side of this main leader. You need to make sure that these little guys here that aren't going to be productive aren't there at all. And here, this peach tree was very tall. I just took, probably 3 or 4 feet off of the top of numerous branches because it goes clear over the top of the house. And a few years ago, it got some heavy snowfall, and then we got high winds the next day, and it actually split the trunk. Jen noticed it, came out immediately and taped it up. And this was 2 or 3 years ago, and we could take that tape off if we want. It healed it right up. It actually worked. But as you can see, and it's probably hard to see with all the other ground litter, we've taken numerous branches off of this tree. We've probably taken a quarter of this tree away this year. So that's all we're going to do for now. It could stand a little more pruning here and there, but we've already done enough that I feel it's risky to do much more. And now here's this plum tree afterwards, and it might not look that much different. It might look like the same thing that I showed you before we pruned. But we carefully pruned the things that were important to prune, and we ended up with branches all over the ground. The ground right now is just littered with these branches. You see all these guys? That all came off of just that one plum tree. So while it still looks like a mess, and trees do, fruit trees this time of year, they just look like a twig-filled mess. But we pulled probably a quarter of this tree off, and that's not our goal to pull a quarter of every tree off, but if you do, it's fine. It doesn't hurt anything. You can pull up to 30% off of a tree. And you can see, like this plum tree here, we pruned this branch just because it comes out in the path. We don't want our paths heavily disrupted by tree branches, and you can just see some of the cuts we made along the way. And this again looks like a twiggy mess, but it's not. It's back to where we want it, and it's going to be productive this year. You can see the branches all over the ground. We pulled a lot off of it. This cherry tree and this cherry tree we didn't touch because they're actually doing just fine. But like this peach tree, now that it's all pruned enough, and it looks extra twiggy because it has a Siberian pea shrub behind it, so that looks like it's all part of this tree, and it's not. It just was somewhat companion planted with this tree. Siberian pea shrubs are excellent to put in your garden because they're so prolific and they attract many of the insects that would otherwise feed on your trees. So they're great for that, and we plant them fairly close to the trees because of that. That's maybe a little close, but we plant them pretty close to the trees for that reason. And this peach tree is all pruned up now. We got just like you can see right there, there was a cut. You know, so we pulled off everything we wanted to pull. We pulled off all the branches that were going to come out into the middle. We pulled all the branches that were crisscrossing each other. We pulled all the branches that were dead or diseased or damaged. And then of the long spindly guys that we left, we got them down to a foot or less long. You know, a foot to 18 inches long. That way your fruit doesn't weigh down those spindly little branches too much. And if you cut them to a foot to 18 inches, it'll strengthen them. so they'll hold more fruit and they'll be stronger for next year. So that's the sort of pruning we did. And although they don't look much different, these trees are now all pruned. Now these black raspberries here, numerous clusters of them along the back of the house, 5, 6 clusters of them. Each cluster has between 8 and maybe 15 main stems. We need to get that down to about 3 per cluster. So we're going to prune the living heck out of these black raspberries. You see, look how many are in that cluster. And that cluster. There's as many as 15 in there. We're going to get that down to about 3. And healthy black raspberries that will put out every bit as many as all these clusters will only have to be about 3 main stalks strong. You'll get as much production off of those 3 as you would get from all of these. So why prune them at all? Well, because all of these are going to produce an absolute mess of smaller black raspberries. And when you have an absolute thicket of black raspberries, you can't get into the plants to pick the raspberries, which will be smaller, by the way. They'll be numerous, but they'll be smaller. And you can't even hardly get in there to do it without welding gloves on. Whereas if we reduce these clusters to about 3 main liters per cluster, you'll be able to get in there easier. Sunlight will be able to get in there easier. It's going to be harder for any kind of fungal disease to take hold, and the berries themselves will be bigger and easily accessible in comparison. Now here's that same first cluster I showed you that had between 8 and 11 in it. I didn't count. Now I've got it down to 3. They're all spaced apart enough from each other. They're all headed in different directions from each other. And I cut them all off at roughly 3 feet. These 2 are closer to 4. And that's a good start for this cluster this year. But I want to show you something interesting that came off of this cluster. Here's the pile of extensions that we didn't want to keep. These are the branched off units that we decided to get rid of, all laying here, and they're laying over here in a big pile. But one of them had, and black raspberries will do this every time, they arch out, and then they eventually will touch the ground if you let them get long enough. And then if you leave them touching the ground, especially if leaf litter or things like that gets on top of them, any weight at all gets on top of them and plants them to the ground, where they're actually touching in a way that the wind won't wiggle them free, they'll tip root. And I'll show you what that is. This one right here, tip rooted. It touched down in the garden and got covered up with enough refuse and leaf litter that it held it in place. And then as you can see, it went ahead and rooted from there. So if you have a certain amount of black raspberries, even one, and you want to make more and you don't want to pay for more, what you do is once they get grown out enough to bend down and touch the ground, let them touch the ground, put something on top of them. It could be a little piece of wood. It could just be some pile of leaf litter. It could be about anything, a clump of dirt. You put that on top of there, then you're following spring, or even later on in the year if you've done it early enough, it'll be tip rooted. And then you simply cut this off as much as a foot above the tip root. Even though if it's only a few inches long, it'll still work. But you have a better chance of success, and the chances are through the roof, actually. And you cut this off at about a foot long right here, and then you bury this guy, and now you've got another black raspberry plant, one for free. So you could start with one, and a few seasons later have 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 of them lining a whole entire area if you want. You can duplicate them till the end of time. All you have to initially purchase or acquire is one. If you have the patience, then you can get as many as you want out of it just by tip rooting them. Okay, now I'm right here at the tail end of this row of them, and as you can see, I've gotten each one down to 3, except for one I took down to 2 canes. And right here, I'll show you something. You can see I've got this down to just 3 canes. The one next to it is just 2. The one next to it is 3, 3, and 3. Here's a little spindly guy. I always try and get rid of the small ones. I try and keep the healthier ones. But this little guy right here, as you can see, runs along here. Runs behind here. This is where my air conditioner is. And it runs all the way over here alongside another little spindly one. And this is actually a branch off of another one. See that wiggling right there? This is a branch off of another spindly little guy. I'll put my glove on here. And as you can see, this one's begun to tip root. This one right here, look at that. That's a full-on plant. And this is just about a 10-foot long string that came out of that last cluster down there. You can see it runs right here behind the cooler. Like I said, this guy right here is a branch off of another spindly little guy. The branch itself touched the ground enough to tip root, and this guy touched down hard enough that it became a full-on plant. So now we're going to cut this one off up here like I did the last one I just showed you. Jen actually cut that one off and went and replanted it. We're going to cut this one off about a foot up the stem and go replant it as well. But as you can see, that's how they look when they first start tip rooting. When they first decide, because this was just a flat end, just a cut off end from last year's pruning. They made it all the way down here, stabbed into the ground, and then this is where it starts. And then that one I just showed you is how they can get, which is just a full-on plant. So if you plant it right and are opportunistic enough, you can get a lot of black raspberries for no cost at all. So thanks for riding along with us and spending part of a gorgeous afternoon in the garden. And if you like this video or any of the other videos that we post, hit the like button. That's going to help me grow my channel. And if you're interested in this sort of thing, or auto body or carpentry or any of the other things we do, you might as well go ahead and subscribe, because, you know, we always got something going on. We'll see you guys around.